Welcome in. Welcome in. Excited to invite you to the second to last session of the day because Philip Bell's closing remarks is a just staple we love of these events. It's an event in itself. So be sure to tune in at the close of the hour for Mr. Bell. Excited to be hanging out with you and a couple of our friends, my friends here. I know we're just getting people to join, so we'll wait a minute or so. No, we can probably jump in. Let's jump in. We'll have folks join us in step. So just to use the time as we get people to join, the first thing I'd like to do is share a little bit about the group that we're all representing. We're all here with the Chief Architect Network, something we all build together. I'll share a little bit about what that looks like, what that is. If my screen will work, and I think it will. There we go. So this is the group that we're all a part of. It's called the Chief Architect Network. Today we have 657 chief architect leaders that are part of this group. It's a 501c3 nonprofit organization. And that's awesome because it's really just a volunteer group where we all come together and share insights, widen perspectives and best practices. The world's only changing, has never been changing this fast. And if you ask Michael Butts, it'll never change this slow again. So the time together in events like this and conversations we can have as peers helps us get a lot better at what we do in our offices because everything you read online is either 3 months, 6 months, or more than a year old. So this is kind of how we can stay together in the journey and grow as leaders and also build those perspectives that help us back in our offices. So that's a little about the group. If you're a chief architect, you should be here in the panel with us. So just be sure to go to chiefarchitectnetwork.com and click apply. It's no cost and just a lot of fun. So we have a great topic for you today. We're going to be talking about balancing innovation and governance and redefining the role of architects in the age of AI. Mostly the last part, as you've all heard the governance story a million times, and we all know it. And the other thing I'd like to really call out to the folks that are here is ask your questions. We love that. Like we've got stuff we can talk about, believe me. And we've been doing it for the last half hour for those that were lucky enough to figure out how to log in, unlike me. But we would love to get your questions. We'll bird over to that. So I'm keeping the chat window open. Just type hi real quick so I can make sure that works because I'm going to have a question for you. We always wonder as presenters which box we're in. Are we in the upper left, the upper right, left, bottom, or left, right? So what I'm going to do is I'd love to have everyone here in this panel introduce themselves, say a thing or two about what you think about balancing innovation and governance and the role of EA as we're evolving. Just a few words so people know what kind of questions to ask you. And then I'd love for the chat to tell us, starting with Amy Forsee, which box is she in? Top left, top right, bottom left, or bottom right? Amy, go ahead, tell us about yourself and your thoughts on the top.
Hi, well, I'm Amy Forsee, and I am the Director of Advanced Systems Architecture for the state of Missouri. I work for the Office of AI and Innovation. As far as governance, it's one of the most important pieces, especially as AI becomes more relevant. And now I'm distracted by the chat.
It's
See?
interesting. Keep it going, Amy.
Awesome.
Keep it going.
Awesome. So, I don't know what else I kind of lost my train of thought.
Well, I'll bring you back. So what is important about the evolving role of architecture in balancing innovation and governance?
I think as far as the role of architecture, we're here to help speed it up. You know, we when you add governance, it doesn't slow it down. It actually speeds up your innovation. So it keeps people within the guardrails. Uh, at least that's the way I see it.
Okay, all right. Saqib, tell us about yourself, the balancing innovation and governance story, and how the role of architecture is evolving in the age of AI. Just a quick top line.
Sure. So Grant, Saqib, as you rightly said, um, uh, from the perspective where we see the speed of innovation is changing every day, and enterprise architecture has been seen always as the guardrails, the governance, and ARBs, right? So I think from the perspective at the speed we are moving in, we have to provide and be a continuous enabler and a real-time check. So we have to change towards the way the way the industry is changing. We can't be running behind. So I think that's the topic today, and we would love to hear what others want to hear from us and this discussion panel.
Awesome. It's my honor and privilege to introduce you to the great, the amazing Michael Carroll of LNS Research. This guy is years ahead of all of us in the AI insights. So, Mike, give us your thoughts. What is the balance between innovation and governance and the redefining role of architects in the age of AI?
I think the entire world comes down to our ability to architect this layer that happens between, and we talk about it all the time. We talked about it last week, Grant, when we had all these architects in the room. We talked about getting ready for this for this discussion, and I think you'll hear a lot more about it. Is that as reasoning becomes much more ubiquitous and connectivity is already ubiquitous, the whole world is going to come down to how does architecture allow the reasoning, the agents that work on our behalf, how does architecture enable permission and trust so that they actually go do what we want them to go do on our behalf? And then how do we actually have enough trust in them that they're actually doing what we think they're doing? And that all comes down to the architecture that we build. And that architecture may be gated when some decisions need to be taken, and it may be guardrailed when other decisions need to be made. And it's going to be a brand new world, because I don't think many of us want to just carte blanche assign rights to something that we're responsible for the decisions it makes. So it's going to be interesting. And I think that comes down to the architecture between the reasoning and the connectivity.
I love that. In fact, I might like it a little too much, and I'll show you why. I'm going to embarrass my buddy here. Just last week, the two of us were lucky enough to share a stage together. And oh, it's not showing up. Oh, there it is. And this is my takeaway from that conversation, building on what Mike just said. In 1 year or less, agents will have the capacity to automate and drive large portions of our work, which will have us in a place where which of us will have codified the logic of high inference, which are things that require a lot of thinking, and high friction problems into the agentic reasoning that can be operating at the edge, and will have enabled our organizations to trust it to accelerate decision velocity with action. That's a mouthful, but that's ultimately the crux of the question that Mike and I were asking our friends in London last week. And I think ultimately that.
Oh, I think he'll be back. So let's pick this up, right?
Yeah.
And I think the conversation we were actually asking in London was, hey, what happens when we know that reasoning becomes really popular, right, at the edge? There you are, Grant.
I think I tried to hit stop sharing my screen, and instead I hit stop talking, which everyone in the show benefits from. So probably would hit the right button, actually.
Right,
And
so
by the way, Ravi said it rightly. He said we need an agentic version of Grant.
You're right.
Mike, I cut you off though with my distractive hocus pocus.
No,
where were you?
The conversation really was when reasoning's at the edge, the way we expect it to be, and ubiquitous connectivity makes that world true. How do we want to think about the architecture, and what has to be true for us to have the trust we need in order to be successful in this world? And that was the entire conversation. How does architecture need to enable that trust, right? And what does that look like? And so we had a lot of really good discussion about that.
I love that, and it was awesome, and I think it evoked a lot of things throughout the week as we spent a few days together. It's a compelling question, right? So that, to me, I think, is where architects are pivoting in their role. It's how do we enable the architecture of permissions and trust, and how do we? The other piece I would add is how do we codify the agentic edge with our logic into its reasoning. It needs to know how we think about things so that it can act with our intent and then record that so it can be trusted. So I think that's where a lot of this is pivoting to. But before we go there, let's go ourselves the softball of just where does traditional architecture break in an agentic world and what replaces it? Who wants to take a first run at that question?
I think I can go first.
Great.
I started by saying the speed is one where enterprise architecture is considered to be an inhibitor to speed. But the way we think about now, you used to come to ARB, and that's where everything used to start. Now, the things are changing because now you want to do a continuous improvement and make it real time by creating. Everybody wants to do agentic, but you have to have an intent documentation or capability. What's the capability you want, right? So humans are accountable, but you have to make agents accountable. And that doesn't come by tools, because tools keep on scaling. Today you have one, tomorrow you have different. That comes by creating a framework. I believe one would be the capability. What's the capability you're looking from an agent? That's one. Second would be, reasoning traces. What is the context? And what's the failure scenarios behind it? If you are doing I'll call it a boundary crossing from one system to another system, is there a handshake between them? And creating truly that handshake of saying, okay, I'm crossing the boundary. How are you tracking this boundary between the systems? And lastly would be the human authorization into this, because while human in the loop is, we all have heard this human in the loop, but how does, at the end of the day, how do you track that agent is doing something, but somebody authorized it in the back end? So that's where I think accountability comes in. Somebody is invoking it first time, and then the processes between boundary crossing and technology starts working after. But before you get into that, your human authorization has to be in loop. I'll close with that. Those are the four major which I think of. You have to create a framework based on that.
I really like that, because what you're really saying is if you kind of put this in human terms, is do you understand, and can I audit the exact chain of reasoning you used to make any decisions while you were gone, right? And now that you're back, and where did you go, right? And where did you come from? And it's interesting. Most countries ask that, right?
Absolutely.
Now, most of that's electronic today, right? But if you if you remember when it wasn't so electronic, you stood in front of the guy, and he looked down, then he looked up at you real suspicious, right? And he said, "Where'd you go? What'd you do?" Right? And you had to be pretty confident. I think for us, you kind of say, can I trust the reasoning that you used when you made a decision, and is that explainable, right? In a way that you have chain of reasoning that's mostly, in this case, will be causally bounded, right? And then the next question is, where have you been, right? And have you been any place that can't be trusted?
I love that.
What did you do, and what was the impact of that? What you did?
That's another great one. What was the impact of the decisions you made? Right, that's a good one. I like that. This is good.
I also would want to monitor for intent as well, because what if it changes the intent of what it's trying to do?
That's a great question.
So let's explore that for a second, because what you're talking about is an agent that's capable of not only optimizing to a KPI by asking a question. If you give it enough information, it can also question that intent. That's what you're saying,
Right.
Amy, right?
Yep.
Is
Right.
that now, if it has enough information, is to say, did I have the right intent? And is it possible to optimize that intent? Now, is that a gate, or is that a guardrail inside the architecture of permission and trust? And how do we build that?
Right.
So
Right.
just for the like, we have been chatting about this for a couple weeks, and it's really kind of fun. We're getting to this kind of intellectual understanding of when you think about codifying the edge with our logic and understanding into the reasoning engine of the AI, there's a lot of things that we take for granted that become the problems we have to solve, which is a lot of what we're talking about. But just zooming back a little bit to the question that the panel intended to ask before we jump too far down, which is, how is basic governance evolving? And the thing that we're talking about here is that we have to build that codification, and we have to build how agents trust each other. That is the thing to govern. And we have to also manage how that agent is able to act and learn in the environment, what it learns from. Those are all things that I think we're trying to kind of explain as we talk this through. Now, some of you might be entering our story from an organization that has a classic ARB review and is looking at solution architectures and sees this in kind of a waterfall rollout. Now, I think you've probably heard the story before of moving from toll gates to guidance and collaboration as we get there. We're kind of making that assumption that a lot of us have already made that pivot, that we're not waiting for someone to bring a what they think is complete architecture to a review board that will then ring a gavel and send them back to the drawing board for things they didn't anticipate. I think those days are long dead. And if we are acting that way, it's going to be near impossible to activate some of the calculus that you're hearing across Mike, Saqib, and Amy. It's just too much. You can't get there with a bring it to the board and is it a guessing game of did I get it right? That doesn't work. We have to collaborate to define the solution, and now we have to collaborate to define the logic and how to define the causality and how to define the action and build the controls together as well. So we've really broadened things from a technical solution challenge into what is now an ecosystem challenge that goes everything from the people it needs to navigate, the processes it's going to execute, the tech it will use, and the information, which is no longer just data architecture, it's information architecture, to figure out what insights it needs to know how to act and how to curate its own improvement. Mike has a phrase he likes to call that, it's software destructive, right? Self-destructive or disposable. And I like to use a more positive frame of, like, not to judge my frame, but of, is it self-healing, right? But it's the same thing in the end. It's that you have something that is optimizing and changing itself based on how the environment evolves. So with all that word salad out there, I'm curious, what did I miss, panel? What do you think?
I think one thing in setting this all up, and from experience, I'll just add one thing, is before you get to where you want to go, our success is not measured. And Ravi had a good point about the matrix, but how do you measure success without looking at, am I getting the right results without training, or without, basically looking at enough, evaluating the results enough times before you say, okay, I'm ready, because that any AI or any data set from the outcomes per se will never be ready till you have trained a couple of times. And then you can only put the matrix around it when you know what outcome you're looking for. I think training with the outcomes is something which we have seen that it works 10 times, but if it doesn't work all the 100 times, it's not something which you want to bring back to the team.
I think you have to keep you want to govern the outside, and because you're not going to want to govern every single transaction you're putting through this thing. So the way I've done it is I've set up standards, and we do what's called a technology review. So you bring in whatever technology you're wanting to use, say it's Google Gemini or whatever you want to bring in. It could be just about anything at this point, but does it meet these standards that I have in place? If it meets the standards, then you're allowed to go forward into what we call like a design phase. And this design phase is where you get deep into the weeds and start designing and doing your architectural design. But you've got that first layer to just see, are you even going to meet my standards in the first step? So and it kind of just keeps everybody aligned and on the same page.
What I love about that, Amy, is that we're not just throwing the baby out with the bathwater as we evolve into some of these more I won't say more, but interesting logic puzzles that are in front of us. We still need to figure out, look, we don't need yet another ERP. Like if you're
No.
building something in an ERP environment, let's use our standards and make sure that that's the tech that we're going to be deploying. So starting with, okay, are the ingredients of this even viable? It still is some of that basic governance and role of architects, because the CIO and the broader set of stakeholders like the CFO aren't going to be that happy if we kind of let the landscape bifurcate into whatever anyone wants to buy for any particular solution. Similarly, we don't need to vibe code everything that we do today into something that's kind of a standalone home baked solution. It might feel good in the moment, but you might end up creating a kitchen sink of applications you have to maintain. So there's a place for vibe coding for sure, and there's a place for custom development, and we're seeing that place expand every day. But we don't need everyone to build their own and have everything done a different way. So there are still some governance controls needed to make sure that when you look at the city plan, not just the building plan, it all makes sense. Mike, it looks like you might be thinking about something.
No, I think this discussion is fantastic because it's everything we need to discuss. It's some decisions need not be made by a machine, right? They need to be made by humans. A machine will never feel the consequences of the good or bad decisions that it makes, right? Some decisions, especially reversible ones, are probably okay to be made by a machine, right? And I think us kind of setting down and for each enterprise, so kind of say, what am I comfortable with to learn, right? And how do I want that to manifest itself so I can get really good at understanding the kinds of decisions that machines are better at? Because inside my organization, I have a whole bunch of the organization that just does intermediation between the asset and the strategy layer of the company, right? And then so information goes up, decisions come back down. I need to close that gap, right? And the way I close that gap is I build some type of decision automation. That decision automation is a bunch of architecture that allows me to facilitate that. And the reasoning actually exists. Companies aren't short on insight. They aren't short on data. What they're short on is the architecture that automates the reasoning.
Oh, that's too good, Mike. Tell everyone about the Navy.
So Grant and I collaborated. We got together, and the Navy spent somewhere close to $500 million buying a solution that gave them more insights, right? Well, we all know that just because you buy more insights doesn't mean that you actually get faster at making decisions. Most often, what we've learned since at least 2010 is that more insights actually makes you slower. So you're not really buying intelligence when you buy insights. You still have to do inferencing. And you heard Grant talk about it earlier. If you take most companies and you say, where do I have high inferencing burden, right, through your whole process from forecasting all the way out to where you ship, right? And the next thing you do is you say, all right, where do I have high permission gating adjacent and inside the processes themselves, right? Where are those? And when you just draw different color circles through those processes, and where you see those circles overlap, that's where you're really, really slow in your company. And that's where all the decision latency is, both through high inferencing burden on your employees and decision latency compounded by permission load. And if you wonder why you're not competitive, that's where you start.
And Mike, what is the differentiator of creating company value in the modern AI age?
So the differentiator is decision velocity. And that differentiator, as we went through the math, we did. We sat down and we drew the math on a board in London, and it's about 3 to 1.
So when you
Interesting.
think about that, gang, this is where I want to pivot to a question. Of course, audience, you control this. You type something in the chat, we're going to you next. So you got the microphone. But until then, we're just going to have fun. So I'm curious, gang, knowing that the metric for the our companies is decision speed to determine their competitive differentiation as we go into the AI age. What behaviors, actions, activities, and other things are critical for us to do as architects in these organizations to enable that outcome? Saqib, Amy, who wants to go first?
For me, it has to be explainable. And that's just coming from my government background here, because of the decisions that are made here are real world. Not that businesses don't have real world decisions. It's just that if we make a decision that somebody doesn't like, it's really going to be all over the news. We're going to be, it's going to be highly visible. So we have to be able to explain every one of those decisions all the way down to why you made it.
Oh, Amy, we might be losing you a little on signal. Saqib, you want to jump in and complete her sentence? See if you can just take it right from the word that buzzed out.
I would go from what I see around me, right? So I
Okay.
think the difference what I see is from the organization perspective is the knowledge on the business side has transformed. And what I mean by that is the capability they now get with access to the LLMs and the tools is they feel that they can make decisions faster, but that doesn't mean success. I think, Grant, you gave a great example of saying doing a vibe coding on a laptop doesn't mean it's production ready. And we have had these challenges. Business comes in, brings a developer and says, okay, I'm getting a vibe coding done, but it doesn't have the governance, it doesn't have the pipelines, it doesn't have all the all the security embedded into it because it's a shadow AI. And that's where the challenge is. For us to be successful or make them successful, we can go at their speed, but we have to make sure we embed governance in the right way, right fashion. I think the major disruption for us is business is going at a different speed than IT, because and the other piece is that business has a capability to draw information now, which we used to earlier have thinking we are IT and only IT has that information, or enterprise architecture has that information. But we will have to extend ourselves at that speed and say, okay, business, while you have the money, you have the dollars, the toll gate is not just the speed of that decision or speed of success. Toll gate is also the return of investment. So if you're what's the return of investment on a dollar spent? If you're spending $3, are you getting six, and in how many years? I think that's where in the organization which is AI first, or which says that we are the technology company delivering value by generating electrons, or somebody, all organizations say that, right? So this became a big mantra. Now we are the technology company driving outcomes or manufacturing using technology. So I think that's return of investment is the key to any decision. And every time you spend something, how are you getting that back? And that's where enterprise architecture comes in, with not showing that we are bringing in guardrails, but we are helping them to be successful by saying, okay, what's your return of investment on the dollar spent with this framework, if it makes sense.
So Grant, let me finish out what Amy was talking about with explainable, and maybe put a little finer point on that, because I think she was poking at something that was really good, right? So when you talk about being explainable, really what happens is in an organization, she was going to push it a little further, is that if it's just explainable by itself, a lot of companies produce things that are explainable, and the way they do that is they get in a room and they have an alignment meeting, and they come up with a common explanation as to why a decision was made, and that alignment meeting typically takes weeks to get on the calendar. During that time, values leaking out the company, and so when she said they need to be able to explain it, what she was talking about is the decision needs to be defensible. right? Which means it needs to be legitimate in the first place, right? And so there she's coming back.
You can hear Mike finish your point for you, Amy. Go for it, Mike.
And so by saying that, what she's actually saying is that you need to be able to explain it in a way that you can have the reasoning well enough understood that it is defensible in a way that it is legitimate, right? And when it doesn't bring litigation to the point. Now, I don't mean litigation in the sense of a court. I mean litigation in a sense that humans litigate anything that's left open to explanation that's not defensible, right? That's the issue, right? So typically, if it's an LLM or a group of people, right, that come together and they give just a simple explanation of something, that's not good enough, right? No. You need to have some decision packet or chain of reasoning that tied to it, and that's architecture that says this is why the decision was taken, and that has to be legitimacy, that because of it's defensible and its chain of reasoning. So, Amy, I finished out what you were trying to drive us toward.
Love that.
And let me just take a minute to say,
right? I think you hit it. And I just want to take a minute to say thanks to the other Chief Architect Network members out there. I think I saw Siva Kumar. I think I saw Jeff Kelper. I think I saw, I'm just kind of remembering who I saw scrolling through. So I might miss you, and my apologies if I do. Dawit's here. Jeff DeKelver. Kevler. I'm not saying your name right, but you're awesome. And I just wanted to call out and say thanks for coming. It's great to have you guys here. We have 2 in the chat. Sorry. See, there it is. Thank you, Jeff. Jeff D. Kevler. Awesome. And Lisa, I knew I saw your name. Sorry, my friend. So really great to have some of our colleagues here in the chat as well. Right. Finishing each other's answers. Patrick's right. And check it out. We have 2 questions that came up as we were just rounding out that corner. So
damn.
2 of them. One is going to be advanced calculus. I'm going to be excited to hear Mike try to answer. Actually, they're kind of both there. Has anyone attempted a calculation determining the risk related to allowing AI to make a specific decision? What subcomponents should go into it? And should this be one of the guardrails? And then the second question here, where does deterministic versus probabilistic nature fall in this as a decision factor? Is that now a matter of a chief architect defining acceptable threshold as a standard per business case? So I love this. I think one risk factor I want to put out there that Mike challenged us at the Connected Worker Exchange a year or 2 ago was there's the risk factor that you sit there, you do not cross the street, you do not execute decision speed, and then you turn around and look at your building and someone else's logo's up there, because that's what's going to happen if you don't move, is you're going to be different, competitively taken over by people who are willing to take that risk and cross the street. So, Mike, I teed that one up for you with the question around the measures you might have seen for kind of when that is the right time to put an AI approach on things. And I'm curious if you've seen any calculus across LNS research you can share.
Yeah, so it's partly let's just go. There's a whole bunch of calculus, right? But let's just do the simple calculus that we drew on the board in London, right? If you take the decision speed, right, which and say that manifests itself in percent cost improvement per labor hour consumed in any company, and then you say what's it take to make any major decision that moves a company's performance in a major way, right? What that really looks like is time to decide, time to get permission, and time to execute. In most major asset-intensive companies, time to execute is not compressible, but time to get permission and time to decide, let's say it's about 12 months. And then the major things that really make the y-axis, that percent cost improvement per labor hour consumed, the things that make that true is access to cash or capital, and then the effective talent that uses that capital. And so if you do a simple Bayesian analysis, and I showed everybody in London how this worked, right? Most often, 73% of the time, the average capital-intensive company basically gets 1 to 2% per year, percent cost improvement per labor hour consumed. And and that's if it takes about 12 months to make it get permission and to make a decision, get permission, and then about say 2 years to fully execute. And so let's say for a second, there it is. Let's say for a second that you do that in 6 months, right? And so if you do that in 6 months, what happens is that you go from 1 to 2% to 5 to 6%, and that difference in performance over your competition means they can never catch you. And so now what happens is that your improvement is on a different trajectory that says that they improve at a rate that they can't match you on, right? And you're much better off, which means you make better decisions about capital. All of a sudden, some of their assets look more valuable to you. And you get to send them the parts of the business that you don't like, and over time, that has a weight that says that they're part of the market is not what they would like to enjoy. And so the reason this becomes true is that you look at all winner take all markets. That's what's true in all winner take all markets. They're made by competitors. Winner take all markets are not markets themselves, except in the way competitors make decisions, and that is decision speed, right? And it's a pretty simple Bayesian analysis that you can do.
Mike, tell everyone DP and ER.
So DP&E is time to decide, right? Time to get permission and time to execute.
And the one thing that's not going to happen in a manufacturer that's going to change is the time to execute. We're not talking about software development here. We're talking about a business time to execute. If physical products are involved, that one probably doesn't move as dramatically, at least maybe not yet. Maybe robotics change all that, and 3D printing and who knows what else, nano robots. But these two things do change, and this is why the permissions and the decision speed matter. And if I got this right again, it's percent improvement over labor hour consumed. Is that right, Mike?
Percent cost improvement per labor hour consumed.
Cost improvement. I'm getting there. So I learned by trying, and Mike keeps me honest. So thought I would share that while we were all checking out Mike's story, because you can see it visual. You understand, you change one of those two variables, your actual ability to drive an outcome is significant. And it's all about decision speed and about permission.
And effective talent. Your effective talent has to get better too when your decision speed improves. So
not you ask talent, a calculus question, get a calculus answer. But did we hit it? Did we fully answer that question? So let's go back and just read it one more time, make sure we got it. Have we attempted a calculation at determining the risk related to allowing AI to make a specific decision? And what subcomponents go into that? Should the subcomponents of that go into the guardrails for the machine itself? So we just talked about the other side of that, which is we have to do this because it'll drive an outcome. So the flip side is, okay, how do we make it safe? How do we make sure we know what our safety thresholds are? And we talked about this before we were together as a panel today, and we used an elevator as a metaphor, where an elevator knows when it's free falling. It knows it's moving at 9.8 meters per second and it stops. There's not somebody who is back in the elevator control room, checking every time the machine turns on that it's going up and down like it should. There's a couple things where it's got some automation and some controls, and it's got some measures and safety brakes that help it make sure that the passengers are protected in the journey. And I think that is part of what we have to architect into the solution, is figuring out the signal to the noise and how decisions are made, understanding and codifying those decision controls, but not just doing it all forward looking. We have to do it outside in as well. Look at Amazon. If you're going to delete half of the production environment, a human needs to look at that before it moves forward. The same controls humans have, we have to put onto the AI pieces and have controls to say, you're doing a small code change that might be allowed, but at a certain magnitude, you can't do it until a human or other permissions are met. And I think that's part of the piece that has been missing, is the outcome-focused action control that we haven't seen built into agents that are emerging, at least not yet. I'll give you one more thing on this. It's the example is from Peter Gastov, who talked about social engineering and the AI agents to make images they didn't want to make. So he would say, give me a child having a lot of fun with a candy cigarette and barbecue smoke coming out the end. Well, when the machine reads all that, it all sounds fine. But when you were to look at the outcome of a child smoking a cigarette, a safety control would go off. And that's why you can't just rely on controlling the inputs. You have to look at the output and make sure that the agent isn't taking an action or creating something that is outside of guardrails.
And just to add on that, it also depends on, in our case, we have an example of what do you want agent to do. For example, as simple as if you're telling agent to do create a ticket after looking at the logs, that's a no-brainer. Yes, use an agent. But if you're using a generative AI or an agentic for a front end, really organization ticketing system where a client is logging, hey, my current electricity is out, and then what's the first step I do? It goes into FAQs. But imagine you are hallucinating, and you are as a bot, you started asking you PII data. So now you have an impact on your brand. So you have to think what's the capability you're looking at, and what function you are looking at AI to do, or generative AI in this case to do. So that defines the risk you're putting your organization, and basically what are you trying to allow AI to do, and where you will let guardrails be, if it makes sense.
It
So
goes
we've
back
only
to that
got, believe it or
intent
not, the time
monitoring too.
flies, right? So Amy, I'm going to ask you to take what you're about to share, but also give us some final thoughts to take away before we all go to you guys have to go. You got to go to Philip Bell's closing ceremony. It's not optional. It's just a tradition. We all do this. So give everyone their final thoughts as we get ready to step over to Philip Bell.
I think it's just been great, but the only thing I was going to add to that was we have to monitor for intent as well. That's kind of what was coming out of that little talk.
I like that. All right, Saqib, what's the thing we should take away? What do you think?
I think great questions, but the matter of the fact is, I'll say what Mike said. The decision speed makes an impact. Focus on the impact with governance, but don't be a showstopper. You have to enable your organization. Build on return of investments. Don't move on till you see the return of investments as well.
Mr. Carroll, give us something to explode our minds.
Hey, we're all just trying to get this right, not be right.
Right.
And the future's actually in the hands of architecture, because that's going to determine how well the agents that are at the edge. That's going to determine how well that they are. That's going to determine your rights in the future, actually.
Right.
So permission and trust, the architects are going to determine it. Get it right.
The world is literally in your hands, everybody. You are the architects. You're the ones defining the logic, the permissions, and helping to actually make the agentic reality come true. So you got a really heavy responsibility on your shoulders, and you got a lot of friends to get there. So connect with your colleagues, connect with your peers, share stories, and find your way together, because there's no way to get there by just reading a book. That's internal and external. Talk to your colleagues. And let's also make sure that we're talking externally to bring the right insights in. Okay, everybody, let's not be late. We got to get over to hear Mr. Philip Bell. I suggest you join a minute or two early so we don't miss those comments. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Thank you to my panelists.
Guys.
We had a ton of fun. You guys make it an excuse for us to get together, which is great. And if you happen to be a chief architect, join us at chiefarchitectnetwork.com. We'd love to expand our conversation to include you. So with that, let's all head over and hear Mr. Bell close out another fantastic event.
Thank you.
Thank you.